Welcome back to Onward to Victory. This is Alex Painter, and I'm so glad you're joining me for the ninth and final installment of Rockne, The Legend Lives On. These commentary tracks have been my chance to kind of step aside from the scripted narrative and share with you how each episode came together, the research, the challenges, along with some reflections along the way. This commentary is made possible by our series sponsors, Andy and Tina Nickel, and our show sponsors, West Coast Screen Printing and Embroidery, and Augie's Locker Room. West Coast Screen Printing and Embroidery is, as we like to say around here, the gold standard of the screen printing and embroidery business. So check them out if you have needs at wcscreens.com. And if you're heading to South Bend, make sure you stop by Augie's Locker Room. It's your home for one-of-a-kind Notre Dame memorabilia and gifts, with a museum-like atmosphere, curated by Augie himself. As you'll hear in this episode, we put the legacy inventory that was discussed during the episode 8 commentary to work. That exercise proved to be exactly right for this moment, because Rockne's passing in March of 1931 brought his life to an abrupt end, and his legacy immediately took on a life of its own. Even as a modern-day researcher, the suddenness of his death was jarring, especially having been investigating his life from essentially day one. One moment he was contemplating retirement, still at the very height of his fame. The next, he was gone. Reading through the newspapers of the day, it was incredible, heartbreaking, to see how society dealt with such a tragic loss. As what is mentioned a couple times during these last couple episodes, since Rockne's death occurred in the morning, it made it into hundreds of evening editions that very same day. But from the outpouring of grief at Notre Dame to the response across the country and even around the world, Rockne's death stopped people in their tracks. So in my notes here, I have best versus greatest. So here at episode 9, we arrive at something of a natural question. How do we measure a coach like Knute Rockne? Is it by wins, national championships, winning percentage? Those are typical ways we try to answer who was the best coach. In terms of the program, though, wins, that number was eclipsed a few years ago. We probably wouldn't say the guy who eclipsed Rockne's wins was better than Rockne, but I've come to believe that best and greatest are two different things. Best can be measured on a scoreboard, in statistics, or in a record book. Greatest, though, carries a wider definition, which can include impact, legacy, cultural weight, an influence that stretches far beyond the gridiron. By those measures, there is virtually no doubt in my mind that Knute Rockne was, and remains for that matter, the greatest college football coach in history. Not only did he win, and win prolifically for that matter, he also shaped the sport. He built a national program from humble origins, became a symbol of Notre Dame itself. His greatness is measured not just in the games played, but in the way his name continues to resonate almost a century later. I'll repeat it because, especially after this series, I believe it to my core that Knute Rockne is the greatest of all college football coaches. And so, this is the wrap. The last episode of Rockne, The Legend Lives On. From the boy who emigrated from Norway, to the player, to the assistant, to the architect of Notre Dame football, and finally to the legend, whose legacy has endured long after his sudden passing. Rockne's story has been one of emergence, growth, and permanence. I hope you've enjoyed this journey through all 9 episodes, as much as I've enjoyed putting it together. Thank you for listening, for your support, and for helping keep alive the memory of Knute Rockne, the greatest coach college football has ever known. Hello, and welcome to Rockne, The Legend Lives On. I am your host, Alex Painter, and during this series, we're going to cover the amazing life and legacy of Knute Rockne. In this final episode, we follow the aftermath of Rockne's sudden and tragic death and examine how the man who built a football powerhouse left behind something even greater. From the national outpouring of grief to the extraordinary funeral that became a first-of-its-kind media event, Rockne's passing wasn't just the end of an era. It was the beginning of a legacy. We explore how Notre Dame responded, who stepped in to carry the torch, and how Rockne's influence continued to shape the program in the years that followed. But more than that, we can take a step back and ask, what made Rockne different? Why did he become the gold standard for what a coach could be? From his vast coaching tree and tactical innovations to his media savvy, business acumen, and ability to inspire, we'll unpack how Rockne didn't just build a team, he built a national institution. Nearly a century later, his fingerprints remain everywhere. This is the conclusion of the story of how one man changed a game, a school, and left a legacy that has impacted millions of people for the last 100 years. Episode 9, Rockne, the Legacy. March 31st, 1931. Within the hour of the transcontinental and western air Fokker F-10 falling from the sky, with the country's most famous football coach and 7 others aboard, the news was confirmed by the airline and rapidly picked up by every major newspaper in the nation. Because the crash occurred in the morning, the tragedy appeared on hundreds of evening editions' front pages that very same day. From coast to coast, the news spread like wildfire. In an era without television, the public had few reliable ways to verify such stunning reports. Phones at newspaper offices rang nonstop as Americans scrambled for confirmation. The Chicago Tribune, the call volume was so overwhelming that operators skipped the usual greeting, answering instead with a simple, solemn line. Yes, it's true about Rockne. Knute Kenneth Rockne, head football coach at Notre Dame, was dead at 43 years old. At the crash site, curious Kansas farmers from miles around descended on the scene, many eager to glimpse the wreckage and some to take home souvenirs. Debris was scattered across the pasture, with the plane's faulty port wing found nearly a half a mile from the main impact site. Among the remnants, the Associated Press reported, were pieces of football equipment. According to the Daily Illini, quote, many rode cow ponies to the site. 100 automobiles were stalled in the mud in the vicinity, end quote. In this remote corner of Kansas, a plane crash was a major event, made even more significant by the identity of one of the victims. William Allen White, who was the editor of the Emporia Gazette, was also at the site quickly. He described the scene as, quote, an endless stream of curiosity seekers, trudging from their motor cars along the road. Miraculously, there had been no fire. So died the great Viking of football, on a hill overlooking a prairie, at the crossroads of the old forgotten stagecoach road and the new highway of air, end quote. Ironically, Jess Harper, Rockne's former coach and colleague at Notre Dame, lived just an hour from the crash site. When he heard the news, he traveled to the scene and helped identify the body of his former player and longtime friend. Rockne's remains were first taken to the Mackenzie Funeral Home in Cotton Falls, Kansas, where they were prepared. Per Murray Sperber, another of Rockne's associates, was called to the site. Quote, the coach's old friend and Notre Dame alum, Dr. Michael Nigro of Kansas City had the unhappy task of assembling Rockne's remains and putting them in the casket. The Kansas City physician also brought the two eldest Rockne sons with him to the crash site and then shepherded them back in the casket on the journey to South Bend. As reported by the Daily Illini, quote, when Dr. Nigro told the coach's sons, they sobbed for a few minutes on his shoulder. He comforted them. They fought back the tears and became more composed when asked to take it like sports, the sons of a great man, end quote. Through the grief, Knute Jr. did manage to speak. I'm going to be a coach like my father, he said. After the crash, word was immediately sent to Bonnie Rockne in Coral Gables, Florida. In stunned disbelief, she softly repeated, I just don't believe it. She turned to their young son, Jack, and she gently said, your daddy has gone away. He loved you so. Soon, telegrams began pouring into their home. The first to arrive wasn't a message of condolence, but a final letter from Knute himself, sent just before his flight and signed simply, Love and kisses, Knute. Word of the tragedy raced across the Notre Dame campus. Players sprinted from building to building, spreading the news, instinctively gathering outside their old coach's office. Inside, assistants Hunk Anderson and Jack Chevney clung to the telephone, clinging to hope, unwilling to accept what they had just heard. But soon, the heartbreaking news was confirmed. A wave of shock and disbelief settled over the university like a heavy fog. Former Notre Dame president Father John Kavanaugh later wrote, quote, the world went pale, trembled, almost wept. On the campus at Notre Dame, men with frozen faces looked hard into one another's eyes and passed by unspeaking, end quote. Notre Dame president Father Charles O'Donnell shared with the press, quote, nothing has ever happened at Notre Dame that has so shocked the faculty and student body as the tragic news. To every person at Notre Dame, this is as personal a grief as if a member of his own family had died. His loss, in many ways, irreparable, end quote. News also quickly hit his former player and Studebaker colleague, Paul Kastner. This is per Jim LaFay, quote, Kastner and his wife had just purchased their first home, and in the late morning of Tuesday, March 31st, 1931, he was busy moving possessions from their apartment to the house. Coming out of the apartment with arms loaded, he saw a neighbor rush out to him and call out, the news on the radio just reported that Rockne has been killed in an airplane crash in Kansas. With a feeling of shock and tears in his eyes, Kastner ran back into the apartment and called Father O'Donnell. Yes, Paul, Father O'Donnell said, sadness evident in his tones. It's frightfully sad, but it's true. Our old friend is dead. Kastner slumped in his chair, hardly able to grasp the situation. The man he so respected, his mentor and friend, his coach in football and in life since Kastner arrived at Notre Dame in 1919, was gone, end quote. Bonnie Rockne soon departed for South Bend with their two younger children, Mary Jean and Jack. Messages of sympathy continued to stream in across the country and world. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Jack Dempsey sent personal telegrams. Dozens of his players checked in on Bonnie and sent their condolences, as did many coaches who opposed his teams on the gridiron. President Herbert Hoover expressed his condolences as well, as did the King of Norway. Once more, an extraordinary outpouring for a coach whose impact had clearly transcended the sport. Rockne's agent, Christy Walsh, also wrote in a tribute article, quote, the imprint of Knute Rockne's character, the example of his overwhelming personality, and the inspiration of his ideals saturate every blade of grass, every bit of foliage, every brick in the mute, empty football stadium, still in its swaddling clothes, and truly the house that Rockne built, end quote. Walsh also took to the radio airwaves to share more sentiment about Rockne, quote, your mission in life was fulfilled, shared Walsh on Rockne's up-and-coming favorite medium of radio. In 43 fleeting years, you had completed your assignment in life and departed as you had lived, swiftly and fearlessly. But someday, Rock, surely we will meet again. Until that meeting, good night, wonderful friend. End quote. Grantland Rice, perhaps the most famous sports writer in America, and the man who had coined the Four Horsemen nickname less than 7 years earlier, also offered a moving eulogization in the newspaper. Quote, "It took a genius of a Rockne to blend the Four Horsemen into one of the most graceful and most colorful backfields that football has ever known. He was an artist as well as a football coach, and his loss is a vital blow to millions in the years to come. It will be the loss of a great artist who painted his pictures for great crowds upon the background of green turf, a turf full of romance and action and color that will cover his last sleep. It is impossible to believe that such a vital, flaming, magnetic human is gone. There are few in this world who can't be replaced. Knute Rockne is one of the few." End quote. Yet another poignant tribute came from entertainer and one of the country's leading social commentators, Will Rogers, a close friend of Rockne, who shared, quote, "The more you think of him, the more remarkable he becomes. Knute, you did it. Just as you have come from behind all your life and fooled them when they thought you didn't have a chance, you did it again. We thought it would take the death of a president or a great public man to make a whole nation, regardless of age, race, or creed, to shake their heads in sincere sorrow and say, 'Ain't it a shame he's gone?' Well, that's what the country did today, Knute. Why, you, old bald-headed rascal, you died one of our national heroes. Notre Dame was your address, but every gridiron in America was your home." End quote. Rogers himself would perish in a plane crash just 4 years later, in 1935. The state of Illinois, Rockne's home state, if you will, passed a resolution just one day after his passing to honor his memory. The document read, quote, "For the past 15 years, Mr. Rockne has devoted his time and energy to the training of young men, both physically and mentally, and has developed the greatest football teams of all times. As such an educator and director of athletics, he has taught the young men of his time that success in living meant not only a strong body, but a clean mind and absolute fairness at all times. He has become a national character beloved by all. He has been termed the greatest coach of all time, and his success in that field, combined with his absolute fairness and good sportsmanship, he has won for himself the admiration and respect of all people of America." End quote. And here's yet another by way of Jim LaFay from his Coach for a Nation. Quote, "Former President Coolidge called Rockne a great man, an inspiring leader, and a profound teacher. He put intellectual and moral value into games. Right living and right thinking went into his victories. His activities had the benefit of publicity, but that does not account for his hold on young men." End quote. It wasn't just celebrities or dignitaries paying their respects to the coach. The death truly shook the entire nation. Genuine grief gripped the country over the sudden traumatic death of Knute Rockne. And it did seem that everyone, everywhere, was paying homage to the coach. Murray Sperber shared a sense as to the why here. Quote, "This identification with the Notre Dame coach by ordinary Americans was the most striking aspect of the mourning prompted by his death. Many people identified with his immigrant roots, his humble childhood, and the individuality and uniqueness of his accomplishments. For many contemporaries, he embodied the American dream better than any other figure of his era. Rockne, with his ordinary looks and manner, was completely human and also at the top of his exceptional powers after 2 consecutive national championships." End quote. So university officials quickly dispatched assistant coaches Hunk Anderson and Jack Chevney to meet Rockne's casket out west and help escort it back to campus. As the train carrying his body passed through Chicago, a city Rockne loved and where Notre Dame had played many of its biggest games, crowds gathered at every stop, with hundreds lining the platforms to pay their respects. Upon arrival in Chicago, the casket and its traveling party had to transfer from their train to another station a few blocks away to catch the connection to South Bend. At the Dearborn station, a local paper claimed 10,000 people packed inside, while a Chicago Tribune writer vividly recalled the scene. So tightly did the crowd wedge in that movement became impossible. Policemen shouted, women lost their shoes, and derbies were crushed until, after 2 or 3 minutes, the cortege got started up the platform to the waiting train. End quote. When the train finally arrived in South Bend, nearly 8,000 people stood waiting in solemn silence. The sheer abruptness of the turn of events still kept the country on its heels. The local South Bend Tribune marveled, quote, "It was only 4 days ago that the smiling Rockne climbed aboard a train in South Bend for a trip to the coast. But never again will his boys look upon that broad grin." End quote. His remains were taken to the McGann Funeral Home, the same parlor that had, just a year earlier, provided the hearse used to transport Rockne in his hospital bed to the practice field when phlebitis had robbed him of his mobility, but not his will to coach, to instruct, or to inspire. Bonnie, not wanting to delay the funeral, especially with classes at the university dismissed for Easter break, set the service for Saturday, April 4th, 1931, the day before Easter Sunday. She asked that it remain closed to the public, choosing instead to fill the chapel with those who had meant the most to him. Her priority was to gather as many of his former players as possible to say goodbye to the coach who had helped shape their lives. Even in death, the man who helped define an era was not finished leaving his mark. Shortly after the news of Rockne's death spread, Bonnie Rockne received a message from Jay Wyatt, a representative of A.G. Spaulding, sporting goods company, and an associate of her late husband. Wyatt posed a remarkable question. Would the family consider allowing Knute Rockne's funeral to be broadcast nationwide, the first nationally aired funeral in American history? Bonnie deferred the decision to Notre Dame's president, Father Charles O'Donnell. Some of the following comes by way of ESPN's Ivan Mazel's article, Knute Rockne's Funeral and the Dawn of a New American Experience. At the time, CBS was still an emerging network, but had already boasted nearly 80 affiliates across the country. With the college's blessing, the funeral was arranged not only as a private service, but also as a national event, bringing millions of Americans from every corner of the country into the mourning. Inside the Basilica of the Sacred Heart, 1,400 invited guests filled the pews. Outside, more than 5,000 gathered in the chilly spring air. Lining the streets as a procession of over 100 cars traveled from the Rockne home to campus. To include those who couldn't enter, Notre Dame installed loudspeakers outside the church so that students, faculty, and townspeople could also hear the service. Chillingly, at exactly 3 p.m., the region paused. Stores in South Bend and Mishawaka closed. Trains on the Chicago, South Shore, and South Bend lines came to a silent halt. As the cortege reached campus, the bell in the Sacred Heart spire began to toll, once every 30 seconds. When the pallbearers carried Rockne's casket into the church, Chicago Tribune writer Walter Fitzmaurice observed that the only sounds were the somber chimes of the bell and the quiet narration of the radio announcers describing the scene. Even Father Charles O'Donnell, delivering the eulogy, acknowledged the unseen crowd listening in from across the country by way of radio. He said, quote, "Of necessity, we are few in number in this hallowed place, though thousands are without the doors. But we represent millions of men and women like ourselves who are here in the very spirit of these solemn services, and listening all over America to these holy rites." End quote. Following the service, the procession moved slowly to Highland Cemetery, just a few miles from campus, with mourners lining the streets the entire way. Rockne's pallbearers included his players Marty Brill, Marchie Schwartz, Tom Conley, Frankie Caradeo, Tommy Yar, and Larry Mullins. That evening, both CBS and NBC aired special tributes to Rockne over the radio, fitting honors for a man who, in life and death, had captured the heart of a nation. While noting that Rockne's funeral service was the first ever to be broadcast nationwide, Andy Nickel has written, quote, "The American tradition of broadcasting funerals of American leaders and celebrities had begun. The nation would now be able to mourn together the losses of national figures." End quote. Sadly, no record of that broadcast survives today. It is of note that, in April 2024, through a long-standing family request and with university support, Rockne's casket was exhumed and reinterred at Cedar Grove Cemetery on Notre Dame's campus. Bonnie was also reinterred, as was their son and grandson, to Cedar Grove. Today, Rockne and his family rest on campus and just steps from the stadium he helped make legendary. The day proved to be a fitting homecoming. Back in 1931, the question that quickly gripped campus was simple, yet daunting. Who could possibly replace Knute Rockne? His top assistant, Hunk Anderson, emerged as the natural choice and was named head coach just 10 days after Rockne's passing. At the same time, another familiar figure returned. Jess Harper, Rockne's former coach, longtime colleague, was appointed as Notre Dame's new athletic director. Though Rockne was gone, his presence was still deeply felt. His successors included one man that he had mentored and another who had helped shape him, and his influence remained etched into every corner of the football program. Successors may have been named, but in the days, weeks, and even years after Rockne's death, the question wasn't who would replace him, but how anyone possibly could replace him. Notre Dame could never replace his legacy. And speaking of legacy, what's Rockne's? I'm going to try to thread that needle right now. First, there were the victories. Rockne won often and won big, capturing 3 consensus national championships and finishing with a staggering .881 winning percentage. This mark included undefeated seasons in back-to-back national championships in 1929 and 1930. As Murray Sperber duly noted, Rockne truly died at the very zenith of his powers. Until 2021, no Notre Dame coach had more wins than Rockne, and no one to date has matched his .881 winning percentage. His former player, protege, and fellow Mayo Clinic patient Frank Leahy would go on to become the most prolific branch of Rockne's coaching tree. Leahy would go on to claim 4 national championships of his own. Still, the fact remains. No major Division I coach with at least 100 games has ever surpassed Rockne's winning percentage. When it comes to the high expectations that still surround Notre Dame football today, there is no doubt they trace directly back to Rockne. He stepped into that environment when his former head coach and predecessor, Jess Harper, reputedly walked away in part because of it, and Rockne thrived under that pressure. The press machine was relentless in its coverage and originally word to life in the 1920s, bringing with it an ever-present scrutiny that has defined the role of head coach ever since. Whether through newspapers, radio, television, or now podcasts and live streams, That press machine has never stopped. Gus Duray, who has surfaced and resurfaced time and time again in this series, not only marveled at how the rough-edged roommate he knew in their undergraduate days had transformed into a renowned public speaker, but he also reflected, with striking foresight, on how Rockne's influence would endure long after his death. Quote, "Rock is not dead to me, any more than any other great man dies. The imprint of his charming, wonderful personality that he planted in the hearts of his boys will carry his gospel of clean living and fair play on, and after we are all gone." End quote. And speaking of carrying on, his direct influence on the game through his coaching tree was staggering. According to researcher Bernie Kish, by the time of Rockne's death in 1931, more than 200 of his former players had entered the coaching ranks. 90 were coaching at the college level, with over 30 eventually serving as head coaches. This included many familiar names from this podcast, including Stanley Kofall, Elmer Layden, Harry Stoldrare, Jim Crowley, Adam Walsh, Frank Caradeo, Marchie Schwartz, Clem Crow, Joe Bach, and many more. But what Rockne left behind wasn't just a coaching tree. It was a living, breathing system. His former players carried forward his methods, his values, and his tireless drive for excellence. His influence didn't end with his passing. It spread, replicated, refined, and renewed across generations. But Rockne's legacy wasn't only about who he coached, it was also about how he coached. A relentless innovator, he helped shape football into its modern form and ushered it into a new era. His embrace and refinement of the forward pass, both as a player and coach, helped launch football's aerial age. Ironically, noted Associated Press writer Charles Dunkley, quote, "By a peculiar twist of fate, he died in the air," end quote. However, he emphasized precision through repetition, turning practice into a science and demanding near-perfect execution. Rockne also introduced the Notre Dame box formation and perfected the pre-snap shift, called the Notre Dame shift, designed to confuse defenses and gain a tactical advantage. Rockne also pioneered the use of detailed scouting reports, game analysis, and tailored game plans for each opponent, strategies that are now standard at every level. He developed the shock troops, one of the earliest uses of a full second string unit to wear down opponents before unleashing his starters. He was among the first to institutionalize spring football. In an era when many schools lacked formal infrastructure of their programs, he understood the value of year-round development. He even tinkered with sideline communication methods and used a PA system in practice, virtually unheard of at the time. No figure in the first 3 decades of American football left as many tactical imprints as Rockne. Time and time again, he didn't just stay ahead of the curve. He reshaped it, keeping imitators at bay by continually developing new innovations. Rockne's innovations extended beyond strategy and into the emotional core of the game. He was one of football's earliest and greatest motivators. Part coach, part orator, part psychologist. His speeches weren't just pregame theatrics. They were crafted to connect with his players on a deeply personal level. He understood what made each of them tick and tailored his words to inspire belief, unity, and purpose. Whether addressing his team, the press, or a packed room, Rockne could move hearts, command attention, and leave lasting impressions. In many ways, he helped define the coach not just as a strategist, but as a storyteller. His was a voice his players would carry with them long after the final whistle. To that effect, Elmer Layden later shared, quote, "He was more than a coach to us. He taught us how to live," end quote. Another four horseman, Don Miller, was quoted saying, quote, "Rockne was a father to us. We would have done anything for him, not just because he was our coach, because he believed in us more than we believed in ourselves," end quote. Fullback Joe Savaldi later said, quote, "He could make you feel 10 feet tall with just a look or a word," end quote. Adam Walsh, the center and captain of Rockne's 1924 national championship team, reflected shortly after Rockne's death, quote, "The boys loved him like a father. They confided in him like a pal. He made them win because he watched them, not like a football coach or a taskmaster, but as a boy's father who burns with ambition for their success, and as a pal whose heart goes out to them, come what may," end quote. He also redefined what it meant to lead a college football program. Rockne didn't merely fill out a schedule, he crafted a national stage. By intentionally booking marquee matchups in major cities and iconic venues, he transferred Notre Dame into the first truly national program. His teams weren't just beloved in Indiana, they captured hearts in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, drawing coast-to-coast attention at a time when most programs barely looked beyond their region. During Rockne's time, Notre Dame's national following had expanded dramatically. His teams played in those major cities and cultivated a vast network of fans, many of whom had never set foot on campus. These were the so-called subway alumni, named for the legion of supporters in New York City who rode the subway to see Notre Dame play, and they became a defining part of the school's identity. They were factory workers, shopkeepers, and professionals alike, bound by their loyalty to a team and by what it represented to immigrants and members of the working class. Rockne understood their value, and by bringing Notre Dame to them, he ensured the school's influence extended far beyond the boundaries of South Bend. Today, the Subway alumni represent a much larger portion of the fan base than those who have attended the university, and Notre Dame continues to benefit greatly from their support. He leveraged that visibility to recruit top talent from across the country, building a pipeline that made Notre Dame a destination for the best high school players in America. In many ways, today's Shamrock Series, designed to showcase Notre Dame in cities nationwide and strengthen its recruiting footprint, traces directly back to Rockne's vision. He didn't just grow a program, he built a brand, and one that the modern day program still stands on the shoulders of. In that respect, Rockne was also the prototype for a modern football head coach. Not just a tactician, but a brand builder, a fundraiser, a media figure, and an institutional leader. He handled press relations, navigated campus politics, sold stadium boxes, cultivated fellow alumni. He wasn't just the face of Notre Dame football, he was its engine. He might not have called himself a CEO, that's exactly what he was. And then there was the aura. To many of his players, Rockne was more than a coach. He was a near mythical figure. The 1940 film, Knute Rockne All-American, which immortalized his win one for the Gipper speech, cemented him in the American imagination. He once more became a household name, not just for what he won, but how he inspired as well. He was a celebrity, too, a national one, perhaps the first of its kind in college sports. He endorsed everything from shaving cream to soap, radios to cruise tours, sporting goods to coffee. His name moved products as easily as it moved people. Today, comparisons might be drawn to figures like Nick Saban or Deion Sanders. But in the 1920s, there was no comparison. Rockne was the moment. And he used that spotlight not only to elevate Notre Dame, but to elevate the sport itself. At a time when college football was growing rapidly in popularity, no one drew more attention to the game or to its possibilities than Rockne. His legacy stretched far beyond the football field. The town of Rockne, Texas, took its name after a vote by local school children. Studebaker created a new subsidiary brand that bore his name, the Rockne Motors Corporation. Musical suites were composed in his honor, as was a 21st century musical depicting his ascent as the most famous coach in America. In 1988, the U.S. Postal Service issued a Rockne stamp, which was unveiled by President Ronald Reagan, the same man who once portrayed George Gipp in the aforementioned 1940 film Knute Rockne, All-American. Fittingly, Rockne had started his professional life working in a post office. His image would go on to be cast in bronze, celebrated on the big screen, honored in halls of fame, and woven into the larger story of American life. When it comes to the University of Notre Dame itself, Rockne's alma mater and the institution that continues to benefit from his legacy nearly a century later, his impact is undeniable. Rockne used football as a gateway to elevate the university's national reputation. As Notre Dame football captured attention across the country, it attracted students, donors, and alumni support from coast to coast. This surge in visibility helped the university secure funding, expand its infrastructure, and establish itself as a leader among Catholic institutions. Ironically, some of the capital improvements on campus during Rockne's lifetime, such as new residence halls and dining facilities, were funded in part by revenue from his football program, and this frustrated him at the time. He believed those resources should have been reinvested into athletics. Still, many of those buildings stand today as lasting, tangible reminders of his influence and the foundation he helped build. Most Catholic colleges of the time remained local or regional in their influence. Rockne's vision and execution gave Notre Dame something bigger: a national platform, a unifying identity, and a sense of purpose that resonated far beyond the football field. After Rockne's death, there was understandable concern about the football team and its future without its undisputed leader. The following question was posed by Associated Press writer Paul Mickelson, quote, "How long will the fighting spirit of Notre Dame last without the guiding touch of the old master is a matter of concern," end quote. We know now, Rockne didn't just change the fortunes of a team. He changed the destiny of an entire university. He had built a movement, and a century later, it still echoes. Rockne, a coach of a generation, had the innate ability to command respect from his players. He could deliver a stirring, flowery address to the entire team, or quietly approach an individual player and, as Harry Stoldrere recalled, simply say, "Just play your best game, boy." This concludes Rockne, The Legend Lives On. Thank you once again for joining me on this journey. I hope you enjoyed the series as much as I enjoyed writing and recording it. A very special thank you goes to Andy and Tina Nickel for generously sponsoring the program, and to Andy especially for being such a thoughtful, patient, and collaborative partner throughout this project. I'll sign off now. With gratitude and in kindness, my name is Alex Painter. Long live Rockne.